A paper cup bounced off the windshield. Someone laughed. Then two more voices joined in, and the laughter got louder. A woman pressed back against the seat of a rusted car and pulled her daughter close. Outside, three men in suits stood on the sidewalk pointing. One knocked on the glass. Hard. She didn't roll the window down. She'd learned that rolling the window down only made things worse. The little girl asked if they were going to be okay. The woman said yes. She always said yes. She didn't know yet that 48 hours later, a certified letter would change everything. She didn't know that within a week, every single one of those men would be standing right there, silent. Her name was Sarah Calloway. What was sealed behind that basement door that left an entire town without a single word to say? Stay with me on this one. Sarah Calloway was 34 years old, and she had been living in her car for 4 months. Not by choice. None of it was by choice. The Millhaven Plastics plant, where she'd worked the line for 6 years, shut down in February. No severance. No warning beyond a 2-week notice posted on the break room bulletin board between a pizza coupon and a lost dog flyer. 600 workers gone. The apartment followed shortly after. When you're a single mother with one income and that income disappears, the math gets brutal fast. She had Gracie. That was what she had. Gracie was 7, small for her age, serious in the way that kids get serious when they've spent too much time around adult problems. She did her homework in the back seat of the Honda. She never complained about the crackers and peanut butter. She asked good questions and then went quiet when she saw the questions made her mother's jaw tighten. The town of Millhaven, Ohio had roughly 12,000 people and the kind of long memory that small towns develop when there's nothing much else to do. People knew Sarah. They knew she'd been married and that the marriage had ended badly. They knew she'd been making it on her own. And now they knew she was sleeping in a parking lot near the old train depot, because in a town of 12,000, you cannot keep a secret. You just can't. The 3 men in suits had names. The Harmon brothers, Gerald, Roy, and their youngest, Junior, who hated being called Junior but had never successfully stopped anyone from doing it. They ran a development company out of Columbus that had been quietly buying up distressed properties across rural Ohio for 2 years. They wore nice shoes and drove a black Escalade, and they had the habit of standing on public sidewalks and pointing at things in a way that made you feel like you were the thing being pointed at. They knew about the letter before Sarah did. That's important to understand. They had contacts at the county assessor's office, and they knew a parcel at 14 Drover Street had just transferred ownership to a woman named Sarah Calloway for the price of $1. $1. That's what made them laugh. To them, a $1 property meant only one thing: a liability. Back taxes, code violations, demolition costs, and Sarah Calloway, who was sleeping in her car, was obviously not going to be able to fight any of that. She'd sell quick. She'd have no choice. That's what they thought. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Certified mail. Sarah picked it up at the post office on Pine Street, signed for it with a gas station pen, and stood in the parking lot to open it. The return address was a law firm in Columbus. Whitfield, Fitch and Associates. She read it twice, then a third time. A man named Walter Kemp had died 6 weeks earlier. Walter was her mother's uncle, a great-uncle she had met exactly once, at a family reunion when she was 9 years old. A tall, quiet man who had pressed a $5 bill into her hand and then gone to stand by himself near the back fence. She had no memory of his voice. Walter had left her his property. The house at 14 Drover Street, Millhaven, Ohio, and all its contents. The transfer required a sale price of $1 to be legally binding. The letter noted, in polite legal language, that the property carried outstanding back taxes of approximately $11,000 and had been issued several code violations by the county. Attorney Dale Fitch had included his business card and a handwritten note at the bottom. The note said, "I recommend we discuss your options at your earliest convenience." Sarah went to see Dale Fitch the next morning. His office was above the pharmacy on Main Street, 2 flights up, a waiting room with magazines from the previous year. Dale Fitch was 50, thinning hair combed carefully to the side, reading glasses he kept taking off and putting back on. He was apologetic in the way that lawyers get apologetic when they're about to deliver bad news to someone who can't afford to fight it. He explained the taxes. He explained the violations. He explained that the property, in its current state, was more of a burden than an asset. And then he mentioned that he happened to know of a party who had expressed interest in purchasing the property quickly, who could make the whole problem go away. The Harmon brothers were waiting in the hall. They came in without being invited. Gerald, the oldest, did the talking. He had a voice like someone who'd practiced confidence in front of a mirror. He offered $3,000. Cash. Same day. It's a fair price for what you're getting, he said. More than fair, honestly. Sarah looked at him. She looked at Fitch. She said she wanted to see the property first. Gerald smiled the way people smile when they think they already know the ending. 14 Drover Street was on the east edge of Millhaven, where the town started to give way to scrubland and empty lots. It was a two-story wood frame house, the kind built in the 1940s when people still built things to last. The paint was gone or going. One of the downstairs windows had been boarded up. The porch sagged in the middle. The yard had been taken over completely. Waist-high weeds, a rusted birdbath, an oak tree that had dropped branches and left them where they fell. Sarah pulled up in the Honda and sat for a moment. Gracie looked out the window. "Is this ours?" she asked. "It's ours," Sarah said. She didn't say what she was thinking, which was that it was hard to know whether that was good news or bad news. She got out. The neighbors had come out fast. On the left, an older woman in a yellow cardigan stood on her porch with both arms crossed. Across the street, a man Sarah didn't recognize was talking quietly to another man while glancing over. And then, because small towns have their own gravity, a few more people materialized from nowhere, by a mailbox on a sidewalk pretending to check something in their cars. The woman in the yellow cardigan was Doris Whitfield, retired schoolteacher, president of the Millhaven Historical Society for 11 years running. She had opinions about property values, about appearances, about the kind of people who should and shouldn't live in a neighborhood, and she didn't trouble herself about sharing them. "You the one who inherited this?" Doris called over. Sarah said she was. Doris made a sound that was not quite a word. More like a judgment passed through the throat. "Well," she said, "good luck to you." She said it the way people say things they don't mean. A car pulled up to the curb. A young man got out with a camera and a notepad. Kyle Barton, reporter for the Millhaven Gazette, 26 years old and looking for a story. Someone had called the paper. Sarah could guess who. Kyle had the decency to look a little embarrassed as he introduced himself. "I heard about the inheritance," he said. $1 property. That's a heck of a thing." Sarah told him she wasn't ready to talk to anyone. He nodded and stepped back, but he didn't leave. She went inside. The smell hit her first. Old wood, old dust, the particular quiet of a house that's been empty a long time. But as her eyes adjusted, she started to see what she'd missed from the outside. The floorboards were oak, solid under her feet. The walls were plaster, cracked in places but not falling. The staircase was intact. The ceiling in the front room showed no water damage. The bones were there. Whatever had happened to the outside, the inside had been maintained. Not cleaned, not cared for, but preserved. She went through the downstairs room by room. Gracie stayed close, holding Sarah's hand but looking at everything with those quiet, serious eyes. The kitchen was old but functional. The back room had been used as a study. A wooden desk, 2 chairs, shelves along one wall still holding books. In the desk's top drawer, she found a note. 1 page, handwritten, the penmanship careful and deliberate. Walter Kemp had written it himself. It said, "Sarah, I'm sorry we never got to know each other better. I've watched from a distance. You're stronger than you know. The house is sound, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. There's an $11,000 tax bill and I apologize for that. I've left something to cover it and more, much more. But you need to handle the basement yourself. Don't let anyone else open it first. There's a key in the small blue envelope in the desk drawer. The basement is sealed for your protection, not mine. Trust yourself. She found the blue envelope. Inside was a key, heavy, old, brass. She went to find the basement. It was at the end of the back hallway, past the kitchen. The door was reinforced. Not the original door. Someone had replaced it with something heavy, set on steel hinges. A padlock hung on it, the kind you'd find on a warehouse or a vault. Cold iron, no rust. Whatever was down there, Walter had wanted it protected. She stood in front of that door for a long moment. She didn't open it. Not yet. Something in the letter made her wait. She wanted to look at the whole house first. She wanted to understand what she had before she reached for what was inside it. She went back upstairs. Checked the 2 bedrooms, empty but intact. A bathroom with an old clawfoot tub. From the back bedroom window she could see the yard. The weeds. The fallen branches. And beyond it, a strip of open sky. She went back downstairs. She went out the front door. Gracie was on the porch steps. She'd found a small wildflower growing up through a crack in the old concrete. White, for petals, something ordinary and persistent. She held it up. Sarah sat down beside her. Carl Barton had finally gone. Doris Whitfield had finally gone inside. The Harmon brothers' black Escalade, which had appeared at the curb while Sarah was inside, was also gone. The street was just a street. They sat in the afternoon quiet, Gracie turning the flower slowly in her fingers. Sarah had her back straight and her hands in her lap. They shared the last of a sleeve of crackers. For the first time in 4 months, Sarah didn't feel like she was running. The house behind her was a wreck and she owed $11,000 and she was sitting on a broken porch. She didn't care. Felt like ground. Felt like something to stand on. She thought, maybe this is enough. The house, the key, the note. Maybe this is already the thing. She thought that. She was wrong. A hand slapped a notice against the front door. Sarah heard it from where she was sitting. She got up. The man was already walking back to a county vehicle when she reached the door. Gray uniform, not unfriendly, just doing his job. The notice was printed on orange paper. Large type. County of Millhaven Code Enforcement Division. The property had been cited for 14 separate violations. Structural hazard. Exterior deterioration. Overgrown vegetation. Unsecured entry points. The notice required the property to be vacated within 72 hours pending a compliance inspection. Failure to comply would initiate demolition proceedings. Someone had filed the complaint that morning. The timestamp was 9:47 a.m. Sarah looked across the street. Doris Whitfield was behind her curtain. Just visible. The curtain moved. Believe me when I say Sarah stood on that porch for 30 seconds and did not move a muscle. Then she went inside and started making calls. The county office told her the complaint was already filed and processed and there wasn't much to be done before the inspection. The woman on the phone was not unkind, but she was clear. 72 hours. The violations had to be corrected or the property would be condemned. Dale Fitch's office was warmer the second time. Noticeably warmer. He had news. The Harmon brothers had revised their offer. $8,000. They could move fast, sign today, and she'd never have to worry about the violations because they'd become someone else's problem. Sarah told him she'd think about it. She sat in the kitchen of that old house and looked at the walls. $11,000 in back taxes. 14 code violations. 72 hours. $8,000 on the table. On paper, the math was obvious. Take the money. Walk away. At least walk away with something. She didn't take it. Instead, she drove to the south end of Millhaven, to a one-man contractor operation she'd heard about from a woman at the church where she sometimes parked overnight. The man's name was Marcus Webb. He'd been in Millhaven his whole life, 40 years of it, and he had the quiet manner of someone who'd learned more from buildings than from people. She told him the situation. He listened without interrupting. Then he said he'd known Walter Kemp. He said it simply, like he was noting the weather. Walter was a private man, Marcus said, but solid. If he said the house is sound, the house is sound. Let me take a look. He came the next morning with a flashlight and a notebook. He spent 2 hours going through the property. He tapped walls, checked joists, tested the electrical panel, ran water through the pipes. When he came out, he had 4 pages of notes and a look on his face that was somewhere between concern and respect. Structurally, this house is better than most of what gets built today, he said. The violations are cosmetic and vegetation. The boarded window needs replacing. The porch needs reinforcement. The yard. He paused. The yard is just work. How long to get it compliant? If I bring 2 guys? 2 days. Maybe less. How much? He named a number. It was low. She looked at him. I liked Walter, he said. That was his whole explanation. He also told her something else, almost as an aside. Walter had received regular deliveries for years. Late at night or early morning. Unmarked vans, usually. He'd never asked and Walter had never explained. I figured it was medical equipment or something, Marcus said. He was a private man. Sarah turned the brass key over in her hand. Marcus, she said, what do you know about the basement? He shook his head. Walter never showed anyone the basement. That night Sarah worked. Marcus had given her a list of quick fixes, board replacement, debris clearance, the vegetation along the foundation. She worked with a flashlight and hardware store gloves bought with the last cash in her wallet. Gracie slept in the back of the Honda with the doors locked. Cars drove by and slowed. Someone took a photo. She could see the flash. By 10 o'clock, word had gotten around that the woman from the parking lot was out there in the dark pulling weeds, and Millhaven found that very funny. She pulled weeds. At midnight, the black Escalade pulled up. Gerald Harmon got out alone this time. He walked to the edge of the yard and stopped. His suit was still pressed. He looked at her. $15,000, he said. That's my final offer. Tonight only. Sarah kept working. She pulled a section of overgrown vine from the foundation and dropped it behind her. You've got 11 grand in taxes, a code notice, a house that needs 20,000 in repairs minimum, and no money. He kept his voice reasonable, informational, like he was doing her a favor by being honest with her. 15,000 is a clean exit. Take it. She stood up. She was covered in dirt and she had been awake for 18 hours. She looked at Gerald Harmon. Then she looked down at the brass key in her shirt pocket. She could feel its weight. She said, "No." Gerald stood there for another moment. Something moved in his face. Then he got back in the Escalade and drove away. If you're still with me on this one, hit that subscribe button. This story is just getting started. She went back to work. Morning came gray and cool. Marcus showed up at 7 with 2 men from his crew, and they started on the porch before Sarah had finished her coffee. By 9, the violations were being addressed, one by one, methodically, the way Marcus did everything. At 10, Sarah went to the basement door. She stood in front of it the way she'd stood the day before. The heavy padlock, the steel hinges, Walter's words in her head. Trust yourself. She put the key in the lock, turned smoothly. No resistance. The padlock opened like it was new. She pushed the door. Cold air came out first. Not the cold of a neglected basement, damp and dark, but clean cold. Controlled cold. Temperature-controlled air, the kind you get in storage facilities built to protect things. The light switch just inside the door worked. Fluorescent strips flickered on, one by one, all the way down the stairs. She went down. Now here's the thing. I want you to really understand what Sarah saw. Not just as numbers, as a picture. The basement was larger than the footprint of the house suggested. Walter had extended it at some point, dug it out wider. The walls were insulated, finished in a way that had nothing to do with the rough plaster upstairs. The floor was clean concrete. Climate control units hummed quietly along the far wall. And on every wall, floor to ceiling on custom-built shelving, wine. Cases and cases of it. Hundreds of cases, sealed in their original wooden boxes, some marked with vineyard stamps Sarah didn't recognize. Each case had a small card attached, handwritten in Walter's careful script. Dates, origins, notes on provenance. She walked slowly along the first wall, reading the cards without understanding most of what she was reading. Bordeaux, Burgundy, Rhone. Years that preceded her birth by decades. 1945, 1961, 1947, 1959. At the far end of the basement, a fireproof safe. Floor-mounted, serious weight. Beside it, taped to the wall, an envelope with Sarah's name on it. Inside the envelope, the combination and a handwritten list. The safe contained gold. Pre-1933 American gold coins, double eagles, Indian heads, the kind that collectors and historians handle with white gloves. Walter's list noted each coin by type, condition, and approximate current market value. Sarah turned pages. The coins alone filled 12 handwritten pages. Also in the safe, a secondary inventory. The paintings. She went upstairs and found them, rolled canvases in a back bedroom closet, handled carefully in acid-free tubes. 7 paintings. Regional artists, Ohio and Indiana, early 20th century. Walter had bought them 50 years ago when nobody cared. In the past decade, 3 of those artists had been rediscovered by critics and galleries. Their work now showed up in auction catalogs with 5-figure prices. Marcus came to find her. She was sitting on the basement stairs with the inventory in her lap. He looked past her at the wine, at the cases, at the shelving stretching wall to wall under those humming fluorescent lights. He sat down on the stair beside her and didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "Walter." That was all. Sarah called an appraiser she'd found through a Columbus auction house. A woman named Dr. Renata Solis, who specialized in estate collections. Sarah read her the names from 3 of the wine case cards. There was a pause on the line. "Can you read those again?" Dr. Solis said. Sarah read them again. Another pause, longer this time. "Mrs. Calloway," Dr. Solis said carefully, "I would like to visit that property at your earliest convenience." She arrived the next morning with an associate and 2 bags of reference materials. She spent 4 hours in the basement. She came upstairs twice, both times for water, and each time she had the composed look of someone working very hard to stay composed. When she finally came up for good, she sat across from Sarah at the kitchen table and opened her notepad. "I'm going to give you a preliminary range," she said, "subject to full catalog and authentication, but based on what I've seen." She wrote a number down. She turned the notepad around. $2.8 to $4.2 million. "The wine is the primary driver," Dr. Solis said. "You have 3 bottles of 1945 Mouton Rothschild. Individual bottles at recent auction have sold for between $75,000 and $90,000 each. You have 11 bottles of 1961 Petrus. You have cases of Pomerol and Burgundy that most museums would be glad to have." She paused. Walter Kemp knew exactly what he was doing. Every single purchase, every single year. Gracie was doing her homework at the kitchen table. She'd heard the number. She looked up at her mother. "Mom," she said, "are we rich now?" Sarah looked at her. She thought about the parking lot, the paper cup hitting the windshield, the crackers and the peanut butter, and 4 months of saying yes when she didn't know if yes was true. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I think we're going to be okay." And then she smiled. For the first time in a long time without having to work at it. Word got out the way it always does in Millhaven. By the next afternoon, Kyle Barton was back at the door. This time he wasn't embarrassed. This time he had a much bigger story. Gerald Harmon called from an unknown number. Sarah saw the Columbus area code and let it ring. 2 months later, Sarah Calloway was sitting on the front porch of 14 Drover Street. The porch had been rebuilt. Marcus and his crew had done it in a weekend, the new boards matching the old ones as closely as Marcus could manage. The oak tree in the yard had been trimmed back. The crack in the old concrete where Gracie had found the wildflower had been preserved. Gracie had asked specifically that they work around it. Marcus had considered that request with great seriousness and said he'd do his best. The auction in New York handled everything Dr. Solis recommended. The wine, the coins, 3 of the paintings. Authentication took 3 weeks. The auction itself took 1 afternoon. The total came to $3.1 million. Sarah paid the $11,000 in back taxes first. It took approximately 4 minutes to arrange. She paid Marcus and his crew a fair rate. More than fair. Marcus tried to argue with her. She didn't let him. She paid for the structural repairs, the new windows, the electrical work, the kitchen renovation. She set aside a full budget for the second floor. She hired a tax attorney in Columbus who came recommended by Dr. Solis and who had exactly the right manner for the job. Methodical, careful, and unsentimental. The 4 paintings she kept went up on the walls of the house. 2 in the front room, 1 in the hallway, 1 in Gracie's bedroom. Gracie had chosen her own. A field painting, horses in the distance, a winter sky. Good taste, Sarah thought. Practical and quiet. Gets it from somewhere. In the hallway, Marcus built a sealed display case from plans Sarah found online. She put 2 bottles of wine in it. Not the most valuable, she'd sold those. Just 2 bottles that Walter had marked in his notes with a single word. Patience. She didn't know if that was a wine term or something personal. She decided it didn't matter. They stayed. Things settled. The way things do when the emergency is finally, actually over and real life starts again. Doris Whitfield came over one afternoon with a casserole in a foil-covered dish. She stood at the door and said she wanted to welcome Sarah properly to the neighborhood. She said it with the expression of someone doing a great deal of internal work. Sarah took the casserole. She said thank you. She did not invite Doris in. She closed the door gently. She told Marcus about it the next day. He thought about it for a moment. A casserole is a casserole, he said, which was true. The Harmon Brothers development project, the larger plan that had needed 14 Drover Street as a key parcel, fell apart before the end of the year. A different property deal collapsed, the financing unraveled, and the whole thing came undone in the way that over-leveraged projects do, quietly and without anyone to blame but themselves. Sarah read a small item about it in the Gazette and put the paper down and thought about it for exactly as long as it deserved, which wasn't very long. Dale Fitch sent a handwritten congratulatory note. It was gracious in its way. Sarah had it framed by a shop in Columbus that did nice work. She hung it in the downstairs bathroom, next to the hand towels. Kyle Barton wrote the story. He wrote it well. He took his time, got the details right, resisted the impulse to make it into something bigger than what it was. It ran in the Gazette and then got picked up by a Columbus paper and then by a wire service, and for about 2 weeks, Sarah Calloway and the Sealed Basement were the kind of story people read over breakfast in cities they'd never been. People love a story where patience wins. They can't get enough of it. She gave one quote. Kyle had called and asked if she'd say anything on record, and she'd thought about it for a moment and said yes. Walter believed in me before I believed in myself, she told him. I just had to be patient enough to find out why. Kyle ran it as the last line of the story. Good instincts, that kid. She set up a small fund quietly through the tax attorney, no announcement. It wasn't named after her. It wasn't a foundation with a logo or a press release. It was just money, a specific amount, designated for families in Millhaven and 3 surrounding counties who were in housing crisis. Single-income families, mostly, people whose math had stopped working. The fund paid for deposits, for first month's rent, for utility reconnections. It didn't change everything. It wasn't meant to. It was meant to give someone a piece of standing ground when they'd lost theirs. Gracie started 3rd grade at Millhaven Elementary in September. She walked there, which she had not been able to do before. She came home and did homework at the kitchen table, the real kitchen table in a real kitchen, not the back seat of a Honda in a parking lot. She still had the serious eyes, but something in them had loosened. Kids bounce when you give them ground to bounce on. The wildflower Gracie had found that first afternoon was long gone, as flowers go, but they'd planted others along the front path. They came up in the spring, white for petals, the same ordinary stubborn kind. Sarah sat on the porch on a September evening, the kind that feels like the last long breath before the cold comes in. Gracie was inside. The street was just a street. No black Escalade at the curb. No paper cups bouncing off windows. No flashlights sweeping through the yard at midnight. No one pointing. She had a cup of tea. She thought about Walter. All those quiet years down in that basement, tending those cases, writing those small cards in his careful hand. A man who understood that certain things required time. Who trusted that the right person would eventually stand in front of a cold door with a brass key, and would have the sense to open it themselves. She was glad she'd said no to the Harmon brothers. She was glad she'd waited, not for the right moment, but for herself to be the one who decided what the moment was. The street was quiet, not the anxious quiet of someone waiting for the next bad thing. The other kind. The kind you stop being afraid of once you've earned it.